When speaking of how slaves are provided for in Islam, we need to be very clear about one thing. I am not defending what Muslims have actually done. They have consistently fallen short of the ideal in all aspects of their religion, and their shortcomings in one sphere of activity inevitably doomed other areas of praxis to failure as well. An Islamic marriage performed according to the rules is valid no matter how dysfunctional the Muslim community is. The laws of inheritance or the conditions of ritual cleanliness hold true regardless of who the national leader is or whether civil strife is rampant or not. But slavery in Islam can only be acceptable to God if the state and society are basically just, dedicated to justice, and embodied in a strong community of believers who fear Allah and stop whenever the conditions of what justice allows them to do are not met. An unjust war is the last thing the scholarly class should be allowing, considering how terrible and destructive war is even when waged for the sake of God, and how war declared by a corrupt, oppressive elite only reinforces their rule, their corruption, and their defiance of divine law. This is why I believe that slavery in Islam became illegal as soon as Muslim society abandoned justice. That occurred about 40 years after the death of Ali, the last true khilafah and the son-in-law of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. At the time of his tragic death, Muslims lost the right to enslave anyone for any reason whatsoever until today. I do not intend by this to mean that the original rules permitting slavery were wrong, but only that the conditions that would make it right have been abandoned. If a Muslim polity upheld justice and waged a war in God's cause only, then slavery could still be legal. The verses in the Quran remain valid for such a case, and the traditions concerning the fair treatment of slaves and their eventual emancipation would still be relevant. What I have to say now applies only to what slaves could have enjoyed if Muslims had observed the strict conditions of how and why warfare could be pursued, how to deal with captives of war, and how to manage their integration into a just and benevolent Muslim society. Male prisoners of war may only be executed if they are deemed too dangerous to be admitted into Muslim society or if they have committed serious crimes other than taking part in battle. Women and children, on the other hand, are automatically spared. Prisoners of war may be held for ransom, exchanged for Muslim prisoners of war held by the enemy, or taken over by the ruling authority for distribution as slaves. Soldiers who participated in the fighting and their families are awarded prior rights to slaves, and the remainder are then allotted to other families who have the means to feed and clothe slaves and treat them properly. There are no slave markets that expose prisoners in public and subject them to bidding, as we sometimes see in movies. يا أيها النبي قل لمن في أيديكم من الأسرى إن يعلم الله في قلوبكم خيرا يؤتكم خيرا مما أخذ منكم ويغفر لكم والله غفور رحيم. Chapter 8, verse 70. Not everyone who fights against the Muslims should be considered enemies. Many were misinformed about Islam, or were compelled to fight for any of the reasons that drag people into serving national causes that do not concern them. As the verse indicates, captives taken in battle could expect a better life than what they lost, since they were being transferred from a society at war with Islam to one inclined to truth, fairness, and mercy. A just ruler would ensure that newly acquired slaves be treated fairly, not abused or exploited, and receive over time the right to be manumitted according to chapter 24, verse 33. وَالَّذِينَ يَبْتَغُونَ الْكِتَابَ مِمَّا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ فَكَاتِبُوهُمْ إِنْ عَلِمْتُمْ فِيهِمْ خَيْرًا. The condition that God see goodness in captives and that Muslim owners look for such goodness as well indicates that slaves were not to be dehumanized or considered a subclass, but rather to be introduced as potential participants in a society founded on justice and devotion to Allah alone. Not all captives, however, would be ready for this step into freedom. And there are a hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ noticed some defect and advised that certain slaves be resold rather than released. Their continued service to the greater good of Muslim society might be better for them than being left to their own devices without family, friends, or a plan for the future. Having lost their freedom, they might have lost also the ability to make use of it after regaining it. The condition of a slave is one which, by its very nature, involves compulsion and the loss of consent. This matter of consent is particularly concerning when discussing female slaves or concubines, sometimes referred to as sex slaves. I will deal with this sensitive topic in my next video, inshallah.